Bonjour, je m'appelle Dominique Charon et je suis la vice-présidente des programmes et des partenariats pour le Centre de recherche pour le développement international. Il me fait énormément plaisir d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Comme vous avez pu constater lors de notre courte vidéo d'introduction, nous sommes une société de la couronne canadienne axée sur la recherche pour le développement. Et notre discussion aujourd'hui porte sur l'économie des soins, the care economy, et notre discussion sera en anglais. I'll switch to English now. I'd like to thank the International Economic Forum of the Americas for the opportunity to discuss the social good and economic benefit of ramping up investments in the care economy now. This is an important avenue to help mobilize a strong economic recovery from COVID-19 and contribute in the long term to achieving sustainable development goals. The pandemic has exposed a care crisis. The precarious nature of paid care work has been laid bare as care workers, primarily women and racial minorities, contracted or succumbed to the disease or were asked to shoulder extra work in dangerous conditions. It also exposed the importance of unpaid care work, as predominantly women everywhere left paid work to stay home to look after children out of school or family members who are ill, or stayed at work but saw their productivity decline as they juggled these things. The pandemic also exposed how women in minority groups or in lower socioeconomic groups often working in informal settings, were more significantly impacted than others by lockdown measures, resulting in job loss and lost income. Today's discussion then focuses on the care economy, the sector of the economy that is responsible for the provision of care and services that contribute to the nurturing of current and future generations. More specifically, it involves the bearing of children, child care, elder care, the care of people with disability. It also includes education sector, healthcare sector, and the personal and domestic services that are provided in both paid and unpaid forms, and within formal and informal sectors. The pandemic may have exposed a crisis in the care economy. And our panel today will show that this crisis existed well before 2020, and that it is attributable in part to deep-seated structural and persistent gender inequality affecting mainly lower-income women. In our discussion today, we'll learn from private sector initiatives that generate care economy solutions with market-based approaches. Social innovators and business for good movement are stepping in to provide urgent solutions to address the negative health and economic impacts of COVID-19 and identifying pathways for solutions in the wider care crisis. Now, gender equality and inclusion are central to the International Development Research Center, my organization, to our mandate and our approach. As part of Canada's foreign affairs and development efforts, our strategy is to engage and support research led in the Global South for the Global South towards building a more sustainable and inclusive world. We place a priority on private sector engagement to help us bring innovation and solutions to the fore and to scale the impact of the research results. At IDRC, consideration of gender and other inequalities are a key aspect of research quality, and our programs address many dimensions of inequality, contributing evidence and innovative solutions that improve agency, bodily integrity, economic empowerment, and the policies, legislation, and institutions that promote gender equality and inclusion. We've contributed through our research to understanding how care responsibilities hamper women's economic empowerment. through the Growth and Economic Opportunities for Women initiative with our partners, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, IDRC is contributing new evidence on how both businesses and public services may more effectively provide affordable childcare for marginalized women, as well as innovating technologies that save women time and reduce energy consumption and costs. Now, COVID-19 has not only exposed and amplified the cost and impact of gender and racial inequalities and the crisis in the care economy, it has increased urgency around the need for action. We must put gender equality and the care economy at the core of pandemic responses and recovery efforts. And the private sector action in particular has the potential to catalyze this change rapidly. So let's get the conversation started. Let me introduce the panel. Afzal Habib is the co-founder and director of Kidogo Innovations, a social enterprise that provides childcare in Kenya. And Marie Levesque, who is with you there in Montreal, is the director of Gender and Impact Management at Canada's Development Finance Institution, FinDev Canada. Bonjour, Anne-Marie. And Anu Shetty is a principal at the Soros Economic Development Fund and the Economic Justice Program of Open Society Foundations. And she's joining me with Afzal here in the virtual world space. Thanks very much to our panelists. Now, let's talk about the potential for innovation in the care economy through business and investment. Afzal Habib, you co-founded Kidogo, a social enterprise that provides affordable and quality childcare to more than 10,000 children in Kenya. Why did you create this Kidogo business, and what is innovative about it in the context of the care economy?
Dominique, thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure. I'd like to start with a quick story, if you'll allow me. About a decade ago, my co-founder and wife, Sabrina, uncovered what we saw as a childcare crisis in Kenya, particularly in the urban informal settlements. She was conducting a study with the Aga Khan Development Network around maternal and child health, and when speaking with local community health workers, kept saying that the issue was something about these baby care centers. We didn't really know what they meant. What was this baby care center? And so they took us to see one. And we were taken deep into the informal settlement, into the slum, to an unmarked property, an unmarked shack, not more than 10 feet by 10 feet, dark, damp inside. And as she walked into this space and her eyes were adjusting to the dark, she noticed her foot hit something. It was a baby girl. Probably not more than 6 months old, lying on the cold, hard floor. And as her eyes adjusted to the dark, she realized that there was actually 20 or more of these young babies in this space, but all were completely silent. What we learned as we asked more questions was that this was actually the best childcare option for working mothers living in Nairobi's low-income communities, who effectively had to choose between leaving their children in one of these centers that we estimate there are something like 3,000 of just in Nairobi, or putting food on the table and not really having a choice in between. Earlier this year, the World Bank published a report estimating that some 350 million children, including that baby girl, lack decent quality childcare that they just don't have access to, that parents don't have access to. It is a crisis. And this is not only a crisis that affects the healthy growth and development of young children during those most important early years of their life, it really affects working moms and working dads, frankly, to join or rejoin the workforce. In 2014, Sabrina and I launched Kidogo. Kidogo is a social enterprise that uses a social franchising model to improve the quality of childcare centers like the one I talked about for families across East Africa. We recruit women running these informal centers, provide training, mentorship, facility improvements, and curriculum materials that help them to improve the quality of the services that they provide to families. Once they meet our minimum standards, these mamapreneurs, as we like to call them, join our franchise network as members and use the Kidogo brand name to give parents a peace of mind when dropping off their children, that they are now in good hands. As of today, we've become the largest network of childcare centers in the country, with something like 500 centers serving over 10,000 children every single day. But what does this actually mean to all of you around this room and this virtual room? Well, from my perspective, I really see investing in childcare and the care economy more broadly as a win-win-win. Investing in childcare is a win for children, improving their health and development and building our future workforce. It is a win for women, allowing women to access the workforce and build their family's welfare. A recent study funded by IDRC and conducted by APHRC in Nairobi suggests that quality childcare could close the gender gap in the workforce within a single year. Finally, I see it as a win for business and the economy. Quality, affordable childcare can have a transformative impact on bringing women back to the workforce, boosting talent retention, and not to mention the fact that the childcare industry itself has the potential to create over 40 million new jobs and small business opportunities, particularly for women over the coming years. Thanks.
Wow, Afzal, I mean, really painting a picture for us of the stark choices that low-income women in Nairobi have been facing and in Kenya, and the tremendous opportunity to make a difference with this model of Kidogo. And also for framing this in the context that this is not just a problem in Nairobi or in Kenya, but it's global. And the scale of the tens of millions of children who are currently lacking adequate childcare and the families then that have to choose between inadequate, unsafe childcare or work is really stark. So we see there's a pretty big opportunity as well to make a difference in the lives of women and children globally. So let's go to a perspective from impact investment on a more global and international scale. Anu Shetty, can you tell us about the investing in care work that's a priority of the Soros Economic Development Fund, and which is the investment arm of the Open Society Foundation, and why you've prioritized this sector?
Yes, definitely, and thank you for having me. So the vision of the Soros Economic Development Fund and the Open Society Foundation as a whole has gender at its core, in terms of improving the lives of paid and unpaid care workers. And so our explicit vision, and I'll just read this verbatim so I don't butcher it, is a world in which the value of care is recognized, the burdens of care are reduced, and the responsibilities for care are redistributed more equally in society, so that women and girls have greater power, agency, and self-determination to pursue well-being for themselves, for others, and for the planet. And so that's our guiding vision for how we've approached developing this strategy. And so through investment, we're trying to build a patient investment portfolio that's focused on demonstrating the value and investability of the care sector, especially given its impact on women's economic justice. So the specific areas for investment that we're looking at are opportunities or companies that are, one, improving the pay, benefits, safety, and or skills and abilities of paid care workers. Secondly, to decrease time and effort spent on unpaid care and domestic work for women. Third is increase access to affordable, quality child, elderly, and disability care and long-term care for lower and middle-income households. So in selecting investments, we're looking for investments in companies, opportunities where our work or the company will be complementing or helping advance work of other foundations or other organizations that are working towards gender justice or rights for domestic workers, with the idea being that we have a more kind of systemic approach versus just investing in just the business by itself versus the larger context of the situation. So just to provide a concrete example of an investment that we've made, I'll share one of our first investments, but I will first give the caveat that this is a new body of work for us, and we are just now embarking on trying to build it out. So we are hoping to have some sort of demonstration effect to others in the market. So we're not quite at a stage of having lessons learned, but we're hoping others will join us on this journey and see the merits of what we're trying to do here. So for our specific example, 2021 being a decade after the ILO Convention 189, which, for those who don't know, was a convention and treaty on extending the basic labor rights to domestic workers worldwide. And 2021 being 6 years after Colombia ratified it, there's limited data to show that about 20% of domestic workers in Latin America are registered, despite this being a legal requirement for employers. And this is largely due, or key reasons that have been cited for this is the time burden and the complexity of the registration process. And for this investment, for our first investment in this new portfolio, aDFI invested in Simplifica, which is a Colombian company that provides a tech platform to simplify the registration and payroll challenges that households are faced with and deterred by in the formalization process. So Simplifica identified this market gap and developed this platform to tackle informality, to bring decent work to domestic workers. And their platform offers e.g. registration to formalize employment relationships and manages the payroll for domestic workers. So to date, Simplifica has formalized over 15,000 employment relationships. And what's important to us is that for a majority of these workers, it was the first time they were affiliated with the National Social Security program, and then they could access certain government subsidies and benefits for their families as well. So, and over time, the company hopes to start offering more products and services like free bank accounts or discounted mobile plans and life insurance products, and also information to assist domestic workers with organizing and exercising their rights. And largely, our long-term vision with this company is that it scales within Colombia and across Latin America. And we think that in addition to opening up the opportunity for formalization, we hope and aspire for the company to leverage its role as an intermediary, not only to improve the working conditions of domestic workers, but also promote organizing for workers and employers. And lastly, to also facilitate dialogue between workers and the government and raise awareness amongst the public to, as a secondary impact, to influence the cultural attitudes around domestic work as well.
Great. So it's really exciting, first of all, to hear of the work of the Soros Economic Development Fund and how using this kind of philanthropic framework, but to have this social impact. It's really exciting in a sector that hasn't perhaps received as much attention as others, for example, clean tech and climate action oriented impact investment. So tremendously exciting to hear about, and also shows that it's not just about investing in the direct service provision of care services for children or for the elderly or for ill, but there are all of these opportunities in how we support informal workers to become more formalized and all of the services that they need as well, that have this tremendous sort of additional section of potential for investment. Really exciting, and also the scalability of some of these opportunities. We're not just talking about small business here. We're talking about quite large activities, even with Kidogo, we heard, which is now the largest in Kenya. And we have opportunities as well to really scale continentally. So I'm going to go now to Anne-Marie Lévesque. Bonjour, Anne-Marie. You are the lead for gender equality for FinDev Canada, Canada's Development Finance Institute. What would you say is the role that development finance institutions can play, and other investors perhaps, or perhaps in mobilizing other investors to foster innovation in the care economy and address inequality in care work and really catalyze the kind of investment that's needed to bring these solutions to scale.
Merci beaucoup, Dominique. C'est un plaisir d'être ici en personne à Montréal pour cet événement. That's a great question, and it's a question that my colleagues and I in the DFI space have been thinking about a lot over the past year. But maybe first, if you'll allow me, I'll just quickly explain what a DFI, or a development finance institution, is, because we use a lot of acronyms and there's a lot of it can get confusing at times, but a DFI is basically a financial institution that promotes social and economic development by investing in private sector opportunities in emerging markets. And those DFIs can be bilateral, so as FinDev Canada, or multilateral as, for example, the International Financial Corporation out of the World Bank. And DFIs attempt to, at the core of their mission, attempt to fill the gap between perhaps traditional development assistance and pure commercial or private capital, so in between grants and perhaps right after more early stage capital or venture capital once the businesses are a bit more established and ready to scale. And at the core of the DFI's mission is really to seek, yes, financial, but also impact returns. And development impact is really at the center of DFI's activities. And taking the example of FinDev Canada, as you've mentioned, we're Canada's development finance institution. We're relatively new. We were started in 2018. And our mission focuses around 3 development impact priorities: climate mitigation and adaptation, local market development, so that's quality job creation and support for quality jobs, as well as support for small and medium enterprises, but also women's economic empowerment. And really, I should have said last but not least, because women's economic empowerment is really central to our decision making. And we've developed consequently a gender equality strategy, and we apply a gender lens to our transactions to try to uncover gender dynamics, but also the potential of each transaction and each client to positively drive impact on women's economic empowerment. So this is really how we got interested in the issue of the care economy. So because of our gender lens and because care responsibilities and time poverty, the time poverty that ensues, are really issues that directly limit women's capacity to, whether it's starting a business or earn an income outside the home. So I've started working on this question with a colleague in Germany. We started asking our colleagues in other DFIs, doing focus groups and interviews, what can we do if this is at the heart of what we do and we're trying to create jobs for women or improving their access to leadership positions, but at the same time they have all of these care responsibilities that limit their time or is putting additional pressure on them. Are we really empowering them? So we were asking these questions. And at the same time, the pandemic happened, and I think for a lot of people in our markets and our clients, but also the colleagues working within the DFIs, care became this very, all of a sudden, salient and very visible issue, as you've mentioned in your opening remarks, Dominique. So we don't have all the answers, but our informal discussions and sort of surveys highlighted 2 main, I would say, opportunities or 2 paths for DFIs to play an active role in the care economy. The first is to mainstream care and care considerations in their current investments. So how can we leverage our current investments to better recognize, reduce, and redistribute care work in the markets where we operate? And the second path, which is perhaps a little bit less advanced but very interesting and promising, is for us to invest directly in market-based care solutions. So maybe just a few words on starting with the first path, which is perhaps where we see the highest number of low-hanging fruits for DFIs to start engaging right away. So DFIs can encourage the businesses they currently fund to design care policies and offer care support for their employees, both men and women, and that's really important that this be not only targeted at women, but also at men employees. And so these policies or care support, they could look like, it could be offering on-site childcare facilities for factories or plants where there's a lot of workers, but it could also be, other models like partnerships with local providers, let's say a local Kidogo, or establishing partnerships and having childcare or elderly care vouchers that employees can use. It could be support for disabled employees or employees who are taking care of disabled family members. And the great thing about this avenue or this path is this win-win that Asal mentioned. So it's a win for employees. Obviously, it improves the quality of their employment, the quality of their work-life balance, but it also reduces absenteeism. It improves retention and increases job satisfaction and loyalty to the employer. So that for an employer who is competing constantly for the best talent and trying to avoid labor shortages, that is a great avenue to show their employees that they care as well. Another area that we identified is through investments in infrastructure and time-saving and labor-saving technologies. So both Dominique and Anu, I think you've alluded to this briefly, but it was interesting for DFIs because it's a sector where development finance institutions have historically been quite active. FinDev Canada, we're still quite new and small, so we're not actively involved in this sector yet. But it was very interesting to see how investments in, let's say, water and sanitation or access to transportation can have an impact in reducing the amount of time that women spend on care activities. So for example, in the transportation space, there's a lot of evidence that women might have longer travel routes because they need to stop at different places to pick up the kids or pick up the groceries or stop by an elderly parent to check on them. So if that's taken into account in the design of these investments, it can yield really positive results. But there's a catch there, and that is if a care lens or a gender lens is not included from quite early on in the design of these projects, it can actually backfire. And let's say women don't feel safe taking this transportation, or let's say the water and sanitation infrastructure does not fit with their needs or their preferences. It might result in them feeling more isolated and less safe. So it's really important that DFIs be intentional and deliberate about their investments in this sector to yield results. And maybe lastly, just a few words about the second path, which is investing directly in this sector. I think from the FinDev Canada perspective, and I think a lot of other DFIs are in the same boat, and Anu mentioned it as well, as the case also for other impact investors, but we're really on the beginning of this journey. Really, the role that we are taking is to partner with our peers. So through the 2X Collaborative, which is an industry body for gender lens investing, we're collaborating with the IDRC actually in this area with the Gender Smart community to better understand the scale of the opportunity in the care economy in emerging markets and where DFI would be best placed to play a role or to foster innovation and impact in this sector. Because obviously we are not the only actors. We have the impact investors like the Soros Fund. There's also the public sector. We haven't talked about it a lot yet, but they clearly have a role to play. In many countries, they already play a role, and DFIs typically work in the private sector. So how do we best coordinate and align and to make sure that we all play our role in the ecosystem? So we're still not quite there yet, but I'm really hoping that soon DFIs can be in a position to send a strong signal in the market to other earlier stage investors and entrepreneurs that there is an interest in supporting businesses perhaps at a later stage of growth to unlock these opportunities.
Merci, Anne-Marie. And the potential here clearly, Anu, you have, it sounds like a kindred spirit here with FinDev Canada outlined. Not only the opportunity for businesses already to make changes and investments that will help provide more services, but the importance of mobilizing investment in the sector more widely. And I was going to propose that you make a pitch, but clearly this would be an easy sell for FinDev Canada. How do we make the pitch for investment in this space, whether it's impact investors or regular investors, to help reduce and redistribute the burden of care here? What's your thought on that?
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think it's similar to what my colleagues on this panel have said. I think we've wholeheartedly agreed that it's a win-win-win, and I think evidence of that, the data will show that actually there is evidence for investment into these types of opportunities. But I'd say that we feel strongly at SEDF that economic justice for women cannot be addressed without talking about unpaid care and domestic work and the inequalities and vulnerabilities in paid care delivery. And like, as I mentioned before, this is a systemic issue, and that something that no one player can address on their own. So exactly what Anne-Marie said, everyone has a role to play. And through our landscaping and survey that we conducted, we felt that there has been a lack of deliberate or conscious action on the part of the private sector and impact investors. And so overall, that the private sector and businesses, whether they're large or small, employ a significant proportion of the labor force worldwide, and value chains touch on all economies and nearly every person on Earth. And these have enormous power to bring about transformative change through the levers that Anne-Marie mentioned, but I'll reiterate the inclusive hiring, promotion policies, equal pay, parental leave versus just maternity leave, workforce development, and also how they expand, how they spend their procurement capital. And we feel that through investment, we can support companies in the care sector that have or want to have positive policies and practices when it comes to hiring and working with women carers. And so we think that investment capital can do for unpaid and paid care workers is that they can strengthen their commitments to gender equality, to women's empowerment, to the SDG goals, and with the explicit ambition to reduce and redistribute the responsibility for unpaid care work. And more importantly, I think actually take action on unpaid care and domestic work where it can have the biggest impact for women and girls in their workforce and their value chains. And again, through those, some of the levers that we mentioned before, or the interventions we mentioned before. And we also believe that businesses can use their voice and position to collaborate with other companies, industry associations, government, civil society, to provide the evidence and resources for policy level change. Again, this can't just happen in a vacuum. I think all parties need to be a part of bringing about this change. And so while we are at the kind of beginning of our journey to try to bring about this change, we are also investing in research because more evidence seems to be needed for making this case. So we will try to bring about more partnership, more evidence, hopefully have a demonstration effect, but also invest in the research with partners such as IDRC to make this data more visible to other private sector investors.
Great. Well, the knowledge gap is certainly very interesting for us at IDRC, but I'm going to, before we go to the research question, just mention to our audience that we'd be happy to take your questions in the chat if you have them for the panel. Just provide them in the chat function, and we will do our best to address some of them before the end at the top of the hour here. But before we move into a discussion about knowledge, what more research might be able to help, in catalyzing more investment and action from the private sector in this space. Afzal, you've been patiently listening to these investors. Tell them, and the rest of us here, what are your challenges? What do you need from investors as you are looking to take the next step with Kidogo?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I don't know that it's often that investees get to tell investors what it is that they need from them, so appreciate the ability to do so. I think from our perspective at Kidogo, we've got ambitious plans for scale in Kenya and beyond. We're doing some work right now in Rwanda and Zimbabwe that we're exploring. And our goal is to be able to reach 100,000 children by the end of 2025. So really ambitious plans for growth. But I think the bigger question we need to be asking is, how do we reach the 349.9 million other children who Kidogo won't be able to reach by 2025? And I think that's really where the work that Anu and Anne-Marie and Dominique, you and IDRC are doing is so vital to really spur 1,000 more organizations like Kidogo around the world to be able to provide quality, affordable care in their markets. That also means that the challenges that we are facing today in our scaling journey are also going to be multiplied 1,000 times over as we scale up this industry. And so just very briefly, one of them, I think, is flexible, multi-year, long-term and multi-sectoral partnerships and funding. So Kidogo, IDRC, and APHRC, for example, are embarking on a new project to expand childcare in Nakuru County in Kenya. And as part of the funding, we will really be examining the impact of social franchising on women's economic empowerment, on labor force participation, and on the impact on local industry, flower farms, and other agricultural businesses. And so that kind of multi-sectoral partnership, I think, really lends itself well to this kind of investment, and it is what we need to be able to plan for and invest in scaling. The second piece I think Anne-Marie spoke to very briefly was this idea of policy and public sector. And I think we are a very small organization, and for 5 years we push, we've been pushing policy changes in Kenya and in other places. And as a relatively small organization, there's only so much influencing we can really do. And so we need the partnership of large bilateral donors, multilaterals, DFIs, INGOs to really drive the agenda from the top down and make sure that we're all singing from the same song sheet. And finally, I think the business community, this is one that we often don't talk about in grant making and NGO circles, but one of our key goals over the last 3 years has been engaging employers to begin providing or supporting on-site childcare, as Anne-Marie mentioned, for their employees. And in the short run, there are some additional costs to take on for employers. We have to be cognizant of that. But research from the IFC, the ILO, around this tackling childcare work is really showing that progressive employers who are investing in childcare are reaping the benefits many times over through attracting, retaining top talent and building positive rapport within the communities in which they work and sell. And so I think taking into account those three pieces, multi-sectoral partnerships, policy environment, and the role of government and the business sector really stepping up and playing a part here, collectively will help us to scale and help many thousand more organizations hopefully to scale to reach the need.
Thanks, Afzal. And the scaling journey, as you call it, is the challenge for all sectors for achieving the kinds of changes that we need to achieve in a very short time now, by 2030 to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. And this conversation today is one piece that's key to achieving the goals of SDG 5. But I think, which is the Sustainable Development Goal on gender equality. But I'm having a strong sense from what you said that in addition to the right kind of funding and support and flexibility and the enabling policy environment for succeeding in this sector as well as scaling, there's also still some opportunities to learn more about what works, what doesn't work. For example, your research on the franchising model, and if that's going to be the right path or the only path for you going forward. As well, we heard from Anu and Maria's both that the finance institutions, the impact investors need to know what the impact will be and need evidence that their investments are actually going to deliver the benefits that they're looking for. And Marie, you mentioned earlier in your intervention that we collaborate together, IDRC and FinDev Canada, to foster this kind of implementation research in the field between researchers and impact investors to strengthen the ecosystem for innovative finance with stronger evidence. If you had to prioritize a couple of knowledge gaps in this sector, what would they be?
Good question, because there's so many, but I have a list. I came prepared. So, well, I think the main question is in terms of prioritizing knowledge gaps. So first is what's the size of the opportunity and what does this opportunity look like? I think the size is important because investors like numbers. So when we can put a number to make the size of the opportunity more tangible, it can be an incentive to look at it more closely. And those of you who are interested in this issue might have seen that just a few weeks ago, Pivotal Ventures, which is backed by Melinda French Gates and the Holding Co., released a report looking at the US market only. But in the US alone, they estimate that the size of the economic opportunities to invest in the care economy were at $650 billion US dollars. And that's for only one country. So imagine what this could look like globally or even just for emerging markets. And more precisely, I think what's really important is what does the demand and the offer look like in the context of DFIs, in the markets that we are interested in? Who are the key players? What are the local models? Because the care demand and the care offer is not going to look the same in every country. And I think there's perhaps a danger or a risk for development finance institutions based in North America or Europe to come at it with preconceived ideas of, child care economy is a child care facility, it's an elder care home, it's this, and that. Whereas if you're, in Kenya, Afzal can talk about it, he mentioned a franchise model, the needs and the response and the market-driven responses and models that emerge will look very different. So I think as an investor, if we are serious about looking at opportunities in these markets, it's really important to have intelligence from the ground. And I think that's why the partnership that our DRC is doing with Gender Smart and the 2X Collaborative to map out a bit more who those actors are and what the opportunities look like in emerging markets is really, really crucial as in DFIs and other investors are pursuing their reflection on this sector. Then also, what are the financing needs of these businesses? That's really important from an investor's perspective. Do they need seed funding? Do they need growth capital? Is it about loans, debt, or are they looking for equity? How much do they need? I think for DFIs, an obstacle is often the size of the investment, what we call the ticket size. For smaller investments, it can be quite difficult and harder and more expensive for DFIs to do so. If we can't do that, can we look at partnerships with private equity funds in which we invest or local financial institutions, for example? So getting a better portrait of what the current ecosystem of the care economy looks like in emerging markets will be really crucial. And then finally, I'll just mention, I think the more and more evidence and case studies that we can get on the business case for employers to invest in care, to tackle childcare or other forms of care, as Afzal mentioned, is really, really important. I think we'll never get enough data to prove that case. I think it's really important to be able, when we want to convince clients to, as Afzal said, take on these upfront costs, but in order to reap benefits later on, having case studies and and evidence and hard data on that is really, really important.
Merci, Anne-Marie. And perhaps we have about 4 minutes left, maybe 3. I'd love to hear just once more from Afzal on what you're taking away from our conversation today in terms of the opportunities for you. And if you want to speak to the missing middle, because we have some major investors here, but locally, how are you succeeding in attracting perhaps this smaller investors locally in Kenya? That would be great.
It's a great question. I think you're right. There's this kind of missing middle right now that we're seeing in this space. There are a lot of large organizations, 2 of them, 3 of them here with us today, who I think we are very aligned with in terms of where the priorities, where the investments required. I think where the missing middle is really speaks to the fact that deal sizes are much smaller than large organizations can perhaps afford to do due diligence on. They're too small to make a difference. And so one of the conversations we've been having with some other organizations, Smart Start in South Africa and Mobile Creches in India, is could we form something like a collaborative or a group together to be able to access larger pots of money that are appropriate sized for us to be able to drive our scaling journeys. But I think we have to recognize that each of our organizations may require different types of capital. The Kidogo model for now is not a profitable one. And so therefore we're not looking for investment dollars, but rather flexible grant funding. Whereas other organizations who may be in markets with a higher economic potential may be requiring, more, debt capital or investment capital to be able to scale. And so we have to really take those things into account. And as Anne-Marie said, we need to be able to look at local models, what's working in a local market, and design the financing and the support for those organizations to accommodate, rather than the other way around, and assuming that, if we have a hammer, every challenge will be solved by a nail, I think.
Afzal, maybe in a minute, what you're taking away from the conversation this morning.
Yeah, so I think, the care economy, I think often, we even had a conversation as a group that, we don't want this to be on the sidelines of this conference. The care economy is not this cute feel-good project that sometimes it's made out to be. This is really central to the functioning of your companies, with 50% of your population needing access to childcare, often more, because we're not just talking about working moms, but we're talking about dads. And it's essential to economies, and it really represents a massive opportunity. We know that there is a huge gap in terms of the need, and I think that the business and industry sector really has a key role to play in enabling and supporting this care work and the care economy. And for you, it can create a competitive advantage around reducing absenteeism, reducing challenges with productivity, improving talent recruitment and retention. Personally, about 2 months ago, I became a new dad. And I don't think that ever before this, I had recognized just how valuable, paid time off for working parents was, and how important childcare is to being able to return to the workforce, to be productive, to work 8+ hours on things that I care about and matter, but just don't have enough bandwidth to do if I'm also balancing care responsibilities. And that falls on me even as a dad. And so we really have to take into account the additional pressure that's placed on women and their ability to join the workforce.
I mean, this is a reality, I think, that all working parents can relate to, and the challenges that the pandemic thrust upon us. I was hoping, Anu, you would be able to give us a final thought, but I'm told we're over time. So I'm going to take this moment to thank the 3 of you with whom IDRC is collaborating in different ways and in different regions, but really for this conversation to bring to light the opportunity, the challenge, but also the opportunity here for transforming gender equality and putting solutions to scale, and the need for our partners in the investment space and the business space to see this opportunity and bring the innovative ideas and the financing to make it happen. Merci beaucoup, encore une fois, à la Conférence de Montréal, le Forum international économique des Amériques pour l'opportunité aujourd'hui. Je m'appelle Dominique Charon et je vous remercie pour votre participation. Thanks very much. Have a great rest of your day.